everybody. I'm really happy to be here. I can't get over the collection of wisdom in this room, just talking to you all. But I'm David. I'm here today to talk about lawyer stuff. I'm from California. Not Northern California, where most of you that are from California are from. I'm from Southern California, where Disneyland is. But I'm a lawyer. So how long have I been doing this? I've been at it 23 years now. So what does that mean? For 23 years, I've been paying for my shoes by trying to keep my clients out of train wrecks. And I've done that a couple different ways. When I first started, I was very excited about being in trial, just like everybody wants to do that. So I had my first trial, I think it was a month after I got sworn in, and the opposing counsel was from Texas. And he called me up. He said, "Son, I looked up your bar number, and you don't have one yet. I'm going to tap dance on your head." And that was my start to law. And the weird thing about being a lawyer is there's a lot of people in the business that kind of have that attitude, and it's weird. So I was a trial lawyer for a long time and enjoyed it, but as I did it more and more often, I began to realize what a mess trials are and why normal people don't want to be in court. And I started kind of changing my career to where I wanted to really help my clients stay out of that room. And at this point, I don't do much trial work. I'm more like this guy, I'm around, I help people. If they have a problem, I kind of help them guide them or get things set up, go right in the first place. My clients don't do hits. Instead, they make apps and fix servers, but same idea. Now, in addition to being a lawyer, I love technology, so I feel like I kind of can fit in this room, but you guys are also much smarter than I. I started out programming on a Tandy color computer. This is my nerd cred here. So it had 4K of memory. I rode my Schwinn 10-speed to Radio Shack to program it, and then I'd save my basic program on a cassette tape. I don't know, anybody here remember cassette tapes for saving data? Wow, it's a lot of you guys. Anyway, eventually I found one of these, and after being on the command line so long, I really loved it. The thing that got me, I don't know about you guys, but the thing that got me was it had this thing where it had to set the click speed, and it had a tortoise and a hare. I'd never seen anybody do that with a computer operating system, and that started a love affair with Apple stuff that, frankly, has still infected me. So in addition to being a nerd, I have a blog, and I talk places, I do some podcasts. And I've got this audience that I've built up on my nerd side of my life that could fill up a stadium, which is kind of bananas. But I also wrote some books. And so I've got this weird thing where I'm leading this double life. And, I'm a nerd on one side and I'm a lawyer on the other side. And for a long time, I had to keep those things separate because I was in a big firm or kind of a big firm. And you don't talk about that stuff. Lawyers don't like that things. And so I kept it secret for a long time. And then I decided to cross the streams and tell the man, stick it to the man, go out on my own. And that was really exciting for me, so I've been doing that. So I feel like in addition to being this lawyer, I also kind of feel for the development community. I understand what you guys are dealing with from being through this. A lot of you are my friends, some of you are my clients. And I know how hard your business is. And I also know that law can be really off-putting for smart people in development. And the reason is because as a programmer, you understand that, build and run means that it finishes the application and it runs it. And it's a 1 and a 0. It either works or it doesn't work, which is beautiful in a lot of ways. The law is a sausage factory of gray. There is no time that you get straight 1s and 0s. It's very rare, I guess I would say. So this is really hard. So it's easy to want to avoid dealing with these problems when you live in 1s and 0s every day. But I still think it's something you need to deal with. I also feel for you guys because I love the idea of independence. Like you, I'm independent as well. It took me a long time to get there. For me, my parents were Depression-era kids. When my mom was young in the Depression in the 30s, they didn't have any money. My grandfather lost his job. So they moved into the backwoods of Massachusetts, and my grandfather would trap foxes. And I think they had like a cabin they found that was abandoned. So I literally come from squatters and poachers. And this is my mom. This is a great picture. So So this is where she spent the depression. But the problem was, so as I was growing up, they just drilled into me over and over again. Get a good job, show up every day, do what the boss wants you to do, and keep your head down. And that was so into me that it was very hard for me to go independent. But I eventually did. So I feel you. I understand what that means. And now that I am independent, I understand that it's awesome. I was thinking about the people in this room today in particular because you guys are really smart developers. I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room that turned down offers from big companies that probably had stock options and all sorts of security attached to them. But instead you said, hell with it, I'm going to go out on my own and make this happen. And you're searching for that pot of gold. Greg talked about it really best today because it's a lifestyle thing. And I would guess if we talked to everybody in the room, that is a huge part of it. I'm a lifestyle lawyer to a large extent. I turn down really lucrative work because I don't want to do that stuff. Despite all that, it feels like you're cheating, right? I mean, when you're doing this, you control your life. You decide what you do and what you don't do, and it's kind of awesome. So then the problem becomes, how do you keep it? Before when you were maybe working for the man, you were thinking how to get out of here. Now you're thinking, how do I keep this? I feel like I don't know how to, that's just the focus of my life now. And I think for you, legal is a part of that. The other day I was signing up for a new web service, and you know how they have those security questions they ask you? And one of them was, they said, well, what is your dream job? And I hadn't filled out that security question for a long time. And the immediate response to me was, my current job is my dream job. And I hadn't really thought about it in those terms till I saw this stupid form on Google or somewhere. But that's really awesome, and I hope you guys are feeling the same way. Okay, so enough of the hippie stuff. Let's talk about the trouble with development from a legal side. The problem is, and I've talked to a lot of you, I know some of you are doing independent work just for yourself, and some of you are working for third parties, so I'm going to try and talk about both those issues as we go through it. But everybody ultimately has clients. I mean, if you don't have a boss, you got a client, whether that's your customers or Apple or whatever, and they don't understand development. I spend a lot of time talking to developers, and I'll be the first to admit I don't understand a lot of the things you do. So we're all monkeys. We don't really understand what you do. And the other problem is that what you do at some point feels like magic. So you got monkeys looking at people performing magic. And when you put those things together, it gets confusing for the people at the end. So they don't know whether what they ask you to do is going to take 5 minutes or 5 months. They don't know if it should cost $5 or $10,000. And but you can't communicate it to them very easily. So it leads to a problem. And I'll share a few war stories because I know you guys have them. I mean, you guys probably have better ones than I do, but representing developers, like you go in and do an independent development project and they decide they want to change the font and they want to give you a lot of money for this change that takes you a few seconds, or they decide they want to change the back-end cloud development or the back-end cloud engine, and they tell you, well, that should be included, right? I mean, we just changed from one company to the next. It should be no problem, but when in reality, they just added 3 months to your project. And as developers, you try to explain to them these problems, but they're monkeys. They don't understand, and they have a budget, and they don't care. And a lot of times those turn into disputes when you have those problems, and disputes turn into money. In fact, if there's one image I want you to remember from this whole talk today, it's this one right here. Number one, it's effective. Number two, I never get to use this animation. So what is a lawsuit? A lawsuit is a bonfire of $100 bills. A lawsuit is a bonfire of $100 bills. I can't tell you how much more money you're going to spend when you get in a lawsuit with somebody. Even a simple thing. You do a development contract, they don't pay you. You're probably looking at $20,000 to get paid. The way the court systems work these days, everything takes long. You've got to go talk to the judge multiple times. The other lawyer is going to be I'm going to keep it clean, guys, not a nice person. They're going to go out of their way to make it more expensive for you. They're going to try and inflict as much pain as possible. And when you get in a lawsuit, it's a bonfire of $100 bills. Now, the reason that's important is because a lot of businesses in here, while are taking good care of you and your families, they're not built to deal with a sudden influx of $50,000 in bills and a bunch of your time sent into lawsuits. How many lawsuits can any of these businesses survive and remain in business or get knocked out of business? One. I mean, all it takes is one. You can have a very successful business, but if you get in one bad thing, it can knock you down. So we want to avoid that. And an underlying problem that you have is that your customers don't think about your needs. They don't think about even these problems that you're going to face. And because it's magic and because they're monkeys, they don't even know where the problems are going to lie and whose fault they are. So in their mind, what you are is their insurer. When they hire you to make their app, they expect that you are going to make sure everything goes wrong. And if something goes wrong, it's your fault. If you make an app for a private company and they make $100,000 a day, and for some reason the app breaks, and suddenly it's down for 2 weeks and they've lost $1 million of income, they're going to come talk to you about it. And that shouldn't be your problem. You're not their insurer. So when we get done with today's talk, I really hope in your mind you start to process that when you get into these relationships, we need to set them up in a way where you're not the person that's the target at the end. Okay. So what am I going to do for you today? I'd like to hopefully keep you from getting screwed. The first thing that we can talk about, and everybody in this room should be doing it, is you should have written contracts. That seems obvious, right? I talk to developers all the time that do things on handshakes. By the way, this is the contract from Willy Wonka, which is you should read someday. But what's wrong with a handshake? From a lawyer's perspective, really, there's not a lot wrong with a handshake. A handshake deal is as good as a written agreement, is effective, it's enforceable in court. The problem is it's evidentiary. It's like you shake somebody's hand, and then they go to the court and they don't remember shaking your hand. And then you've got a problem. The other problem is what you guys are doing is super complicated, and there's all kinds of things that can break, and there's problems. I'm going to tell you about a few of them in a minute that don't come with a handshake. You don't usually shake somebody's hand and say, I'll make your app for $10,000, and by the way, any patent lawsuits are your problem. You don't say that, but you can put it in a contract. So this isn't enough. Whatever you do, write it down. And the reason you write it down, bonfire of $100 bills. So what are some of the key terms you can include in your contracts? And I hope that, how many people in the room, by the way, have a lawyer that they're working with now? That's really encouraging. Okay, so I'll be writing those down. So write those down, write some of these things down, and talk to your lawyer about some of these issues. First one, and this is the one that gets people in the most trouble, is a description of work. Seems really easy, right? I'm going to do some work for you, you're going to pay me. But the devil's in the details, and it's in your favor. This is where your ones and zeros background comes in handy. You need to be as detailed as possible when you do work for other people. You need to explain exactly what you're doing, and just important, describe what you are not doing. Because you're going to know where those trouble spots are. They're not. And what you want to be able to do when there's a problem later is to point at a contract and says, oh, it says right here, I'm going to do an Azure cloud system for you. I'm not going to do this other thing you're asking for because this is what you told me. If you want me to do the other thing, we'll figure out a price and we'll do that for you. So be very careful with your description of work. I think this is something that developers rush through too often when they're making their contracts. You may have a form contract on your computer you use right now. Take a good look at your description of work and don't get married to that. Every time you do a new job, stop, Like Greg said, you have planning time, have thinking time about these contracts. I mean, you're going to be spending a bunch of time on it, putting a bunch of effort into it. Take the time to make the description of work right and discuss it with the potential client. Get through it as much as you can. Second problem you have is getting paid. How many people that do independent development here have ever been, screwed, got paid? It's a lot of people, right? There are ways we can deal with it. I'm going to show you some tips towards the end of ways of getting paid. But the first thing you can do is be very descriptive in your contract about what, when, and how you get paid. A lot of times in the app development business, people do it based on hitting certain, development points, or you can do an amount up front. But think about it in advance and take care of yourself. Make sure that if at some point things go down for you, that this guy does not like you anymore, or he changes his mind, or the company gets bought out and somebody else wants to change the app, make sure that you don't get left holding the bag. So make sure you have methods in there to get you paid as you go along. And then the big third thing you want to do is you want to avoid liability. And in your business, there's actually a lot of ways that you can get in trouble with liability. As you do the work, the other thing I see with a lot of my clients is they do development work for bigger companies. And quite often, they will give you a contract when you start working for them. And usually, and I read those for clients, and sometimes they're fair, but usually they are what I call the dummy contract. And the dummy contract is one that some first-year lawyer made that is completely one-sided against whoever it is that they're doing business with. I was reviewing one of these for a client of mine that was doing work for a big company, and in the middle of the agreement, they had written, if you breach the contract, you are personally liable for all damages to the company. So my client was obviously a corporation, but they wanted the guy who owned the corporation to become personally liable to a national company for anything going wrong with his app. This is buried in the middle of like a 15-page contract. And I called their lawyer and had the Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, what are you doing? And he laughed. He said, oh, yeah, you found that, He says, nobody ever finds that. I said, well, you got to take that. He said, oh, sure, we'll take it out, no problem. But I said, well, how many people have told you? He says, oh, most people don't catch it. And I'm like, but that's what you guys are dealing with right now. There's people out there that are trying to throw this dummy contract at you. You need to take your time, read through it. Get yourself a lawyer that can help you get through it if you don't understand it. Ask yourself a question as you read a contract. Do we need that? I think a lot of the contracts that get thrown at developers are square pegs and round holes. Quite often, I don't know why this is, the developer work stuff I see, the contract they usually give you guys, in my experience, is advertising contracts. I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, but the company has a contract they use with advertising agencies because that's a contract they use all the time. And they're like, well, what's the guy do? He makes apps. Well, we don't have a contract for that. Well, just give him the advertising contract. So it's got stuff in there about, media buys and weird stuff that doesn't belong there. It just makes it confusing and it doesn't need to be there. So read the contract, ask yourself, do we need that? And be willing to get your red pen and scratch it out. Because just like that goofball who tried to throw the personal guarantee at my client, these people know that a lot of this stuff doesn't apply. And frankly, I think that they're going to respect you a little bit more if you come back and you don't just sign it. The other thing is, if it is one of these dummy contracts and they say it's non-negotiable, you just need to put the pen down, slowly back up, and run. I mean, that's not a contract you want to do. So be willing to walk away from it, or you will get screwed. What are some real danger areas right now in the law that you should be aware of? Wait a second, this is the wrong slide. Is that better? The thing that really concerns me for your business, I think more than anything else, the freight train coming for app developers is patent litigation. You guys probably know about as much of this as I do, but the problem is, years ago, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office didn't know how to deal with software patents. They're used to doing patents. Like a friend of mine is a patent inspector. His job is reels, like on tapes, like cassette tapes and 8-tracks. And it's a mechanical thing. They have a system in place. They have people that can do it. The USPTO didn't really embrace software, and yet they started accepting applications for patent software. And what happened was they just started granting patents to anything. I mean, you've seen the stories. There's a patent out, distribute content on the internet. I mean, that's a patent that somebody owns. Technically, I'm probably violating it right now just standing up here. And anything you make is going to violate a bunch of these junk patents that are out there. And there's groups of people and companies that have assembled these patent trolls who go out and literally just choose their targets. When they find somebody that's successful enough, they're going to go and try and tap it. The deal they try and make with you is they'll send you a mean letter. Has anybody got that letter, by the way, in the room? Yeah, see? And they say, hey, you're violating our patent, but we're going to be your pal, and you need to just write us a check or a license fee so you can continue to use our patent for something that's obvious and should have never been patented in the first place. If you don't like it, you can go ahead and fight our patent, but you're going to spend probably about $250,000. So Why don't you send us $5,000 instead? And everybody in this room, if you came to me with that letter and the patent was legitimate, my advice to you would sadly be probably pay it. This is a problem that exists for you. There's ways to avoid it. If you're developing for apps for the app store that you're selling yourself, the good news is Apple is actually pretty aggressive with this stuff. They have pushed back on a lot of these trolls. Apple is, and when they're not pushing back, they're using some of their $200 billion to pay license fees for the stuff that covers the app developers as they go through the store. Largely, right now, you're okay if you're developing apps for the App Store on this issue. If you're making apps for other people, however, it's a lot more iffy, and especially if you're making it for other people that are big. And I know there's some people in this room making apps for large companies. So when you're making these contracts, put clauses in your contract that say, we are not liable for patent violations. You will indemnify us. I mean, you can do that. And the good news is, because the people you're working with are a bunch of monkeys, they're not really aware of what a big deal this is. So I'm quite successful with clients getting these we're pushing the patent liability on other people today. Talk to your lawyer now. Start thinking about that issue. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And with the way we've got this deadlock in Congress, I don't think they're going to fix it anytime soon. So deal with the patent law issue. I feel like the whole patent thing is like dynamite, right? And everybody knows dynamite is dangerous, but it's even worse when it's under your desk. And right now, it's like we're all doing this stuff, and this dynamite is down there, and it may be okay, or it just may blow us all up. So deal with patents as much as you can. The other big target issue for developers right now and people doing work on the internet is consumer data. I was thinking about talking to a friend of mine that does nothing but consumer data litigation, and I said, is there a good summary that I could share at this conference, of how to help these guys protect themselves from disclosure of consumer data? And he says no, because every state in the nation is passing new laws every day, making it more draconian and more difficult and more punitive to anybody that releases consumer data. Oh, and by the way, in Europe they're doing the same thing, in Asia they're starting to do it. So the whole world, if you do anything that's going to release consumer data, the whole world is going to come at you. And the problem for you is you guys don't control the consumer data. You make the platform that the consumer data is held in. So if you're making any app that has any element of consumer data in it, you want your contract to push all liability for that on the customer. Get that out of your system as soon as possible. If you're making your own apps that involve consumer data, be very careful. Think about every step you make. Apple does have some support for this. The other thing you can do is you can get insurance for it. Get a good insurance broker and start looking into ways to avoid liability. I mean, you look at Sony, for instance. Sony had all these breaches of data. It's just a huge mess for them, and it's costing them a lot of money. So consumer data is the other thing. The other thing that gets you in trouble is one more thing. I wanted to use this here because I thought it was funny, but probably not. You get started on a contract. How many people have done work for some third party, and then they say somewhere along the line, hey, I just need you to add X. I mean, how many people? I mean, it's just like every time. And they always want to say, okay, yeah, no problem. And then you say, well, that's going to take extra time. No problem, we got that. And it's usually like a middle manager a lot of times giving you this. And the problem is the guy who writes the check is usually a different guy. And then you finish the work and they say, we didn't agree to pay you for that. You gave us a contract. You're supposed to do it. How many people have taken it in the shorts for that problem? Just a few. Well, that's good. I'm glad. I see this a lot with clients. When someone asks you to do something else, just be a jackass and say, look, great. Here's something in writing. I need you to sign off on it with the extra cost. Please do that. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients lose money for it. In fact, I tell clients, you have permission to invoke me. My kids and my clients at any point can blame me for anything in their life. And so you go, oh yeah, I'm really sorry, my lawyer's this jerk, and he said I have to get this, and he's gonna, blah, 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 and I don't want, if I call him to talk about it, he's gonna charge me a bunch of money, so please just sign it. Whatever it takes, just get them to sign off on that, because when you get to the end of the project, if they're low on money and they don't have a written agreement to pay you, there's definitely gonna be someone there that won't pay you. Next thing, let's talk about legal error handling. So what is this? What's the problem? When you do everything, you have the contract right, and things still don't go wrong. And I talked about earlier, what happens when you don't get paid? I've got a couple ideas for that. The first one is 3 clauses that you should have in every contract, and frankly, on your invoice. And talk to your lawyers about helping you craft language for this. But the 3 things that always get my clients paid. Number 1 is interest. If they don't pay you, they should pay interest. If the bank is holding your money, you get interest. If you're going to be their bank because they're not paying you, you should get interest. The next one is venue. That's a fancy legal term. It means the location of the dispute. So make it your home turf. If you're in Michigan and you're doing work for someone in Missouri, the contract should say, if you don't pay me, I can sue you in Michigan. Because why should you have to go to their home turf? And when they're not paying you and you're writing the letters and they say, oh, we're going to have to go to Michigan if this guy sues us, that makes them more inclined to pay you. And the third one, the most important one, is this: attorney fees. Attorney fees are a lot of time the tail that wags the dog of these disputes, because hopefully you're not going to let somebody get into your pocket for a huge amount of money. And that works against you in some ways. Somebody owes you $10,000 and you write them a letter and says, hey, you owe me $10,000. Like, you know what, I probably do, but I'm not going to pay you, so go ahead and sue me. And then you're going to talk to me or some other lawyer, and he's going to show you his version of the bonfire of $100 bills. And you're going to say, heck with it, I'll just move on. But if you have an attorney fee clause in your contract, you use that as a weapon. You send him a letter and say, okay, you owe me $10,000, but once we're done going through the sausage factory of litigation, you're going to end up owing me $50. So I would suggest you just pay me the $10 now, and suddenly you go to the top of the list. So get this on your contracts and your invoices. Interest, venue, and attorney fees, and a lot of those disputes will go away for you. In addition to being contractors, I know a lot of you work with contractors. I want you to think about all the things I've said right now, just from the other side of the fence. You're going to also be working with contractors. You should have those same types of clauses that you work with contractors. The one thing you need to add to it is intellectual property protection. If somebody is doing work for you, you need to own whatever it is they're doing, because why else are they working for you? So make sure you've got good protection for that. I know I've been kind of rambling on about all this contract stuff, but a piece of wisdom I would share with you after being a lawyer for 23 years is, and it took me a long time to figure this out, but the most important thing about making contracts with people is the F word. Fairness. You're thinking a different word, I bet. The fairness is really important. It's disarming, it's powerful, and it allows you to hold your head high as you go through this. The goal of a contract isn't to screw the other guy. The goal of a contract isn't to avoid you getting screwed. It's to come with a good relationship that benefits everyone. And I've negotiated contracts with very large companies where I have used the F word with them. And the lawyers don't even know how to handle it, because most lawyers don't think about fairness. They think about what's black and white in the contract and what can they argue. And I say, this clause about saying my client would be personally liable, that's just not fair. I mean, you can't pay somebody $50,000 to make an app and expect them to take on millions of dollars of liability. And when you say that, they don't know what to say back. And a lot of times they'll agree with you and you're able to do it. So when you're negotiating contracts, when you're writing contracts, keep the F word in mind and it'll make the whole process a lot easier. I'll spend a few minutes talking about business entities, because I think that's another thing a lot of developers ask me about is, do I need a corporation, or, what does all this mean? There's a couple different kinds. The first is sole proprietorship. That's where a lot of people start. You get your start and you're like, okay, I'm going to make apps, or I'm going to go out and do contract work. And you just do it as yourself. So what that means is you've got this big pool of stuff, and you've got your house and the stuff you own, like your car, and then you've got your company. And that's because you're a sole proprietorship, it's all one and the same. And that's fine so long as you never get in trouble. If you get in trouble, it all goes out the window. I mean, the house, your own individual assets are combined. Same thing to a large degree with partnership, when you make a partnership. And it depends on what kind of partnership you make. There's variations of this, but a lot of times when you got a partner, all you're doing is pulling your partner in to your house and your partner's house in, and if things go wrong, things fall apart. So if you talk to any lawyer, they're going to tell you, yeah, you should have a corporation or an LLC, a separate entity. And the reason us lawyers like it so much is because it's kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card. I've had clients that, occasionally things go wrong. And you may have a situation where something happens. Maybe it was your fault. Maybe it wasn't even your fault. But suddenly the business has failed. Somebody has a big judgment against you. If it's a company, it's a separate pool of assets. Just the company's at risk, not your house and your other stuff. So if that happens, the worst thing you do is you let the company go, and it happens, people survive. But your house and everything are intact. I've had clients that had properly set up corporations that suddenly found themselves facing millions of dollars of liability, but were able to largely, keep their quality of life. Their business failed, but they had to go start over again, but they didn't lose all their stuff. And I think that's important. So a corporation, that's the goal of a corporation. A limited liability company does the same thing. It does it a little differently, and I'm not going to get into all the nitty-gritty of it, but limited liability companies and corporations have different advantages both in terms of taxes and organization and ongoing expenses, and that depends on every state. So, it depends where you are, and there's a whole lot of questions to make, but you should be looking at those two entities, especially if you're a sole proprietorship. It's just, in my mind, it's cheap insurance. You're going to have to pay an annual franchise tax fee. You have to pay a lawyer to kind of help you get things set up, but once you do that, if things go bad, you'll be really happy you spent whatever it took to get that set up. You may hear in terms of corporations, how many of you already have corporations or LLCs or some sort of business thing? I love you guys. You got to figure it out. Good. But occasionally you may hear from lawyers, or you may read in the news, this weird term, piercing the veil. I don't know why law has all these goofy terms. It sounds like something from Lord of the Rings. But what it means is when you've got a corporation, sometimes a corporation will get sued. And the worst thing that can happen is they get a judgment against the corporation, and they're able to drive that through the veil to your own individual assets. And it happens. Once again, this depends on the state, but just to give you some kind of basic information, there's 3 ways this usually happens. The first way is if you mix your money. Like if you have a corporation and you have your individual assets, if your app is making money, Apple should be paying the money to your corporation account, not to you individually. Then you pay yourself a paycheck out of the company. You talk to your accountant and you figure out how that happens. But if you have your corporate account making the car payment or paying your house payment or paying your pool guy, you're going to be held liable. I had a case years ago where it was a plastic surgeon in Orange County. Just think about his business, right? And he had a business deal, and he was not a nice person. My client got a big judgment against him, and I called him up, and he used the other F word against me. He really didn't like me, and said, "You're never going to get a dime. I have a corporation. You're screwed." So I took him to court. There's a procedure in California where you can make them bring the bank records in, and the guy was paying his pool guy. He was paying all these people with it. I went and showed it to the judge, and then I got the money from him individually. So you can get in a lot of trouble by mismanaging your money that way. Second way that you get in trouble is what they call lack of capitalization. And that means you form a company, but you don't keep enough money in it to run it. You don't have enough money. If you need to pay a corporate bill, you put some money in the bank and you write the bill, and then it goes back down to zero. That's not enough. You have to treat it like an actual entity. The amount of money depends. Talk to your accountant, but you have to have enough money to keep it running. And the third way you get in trouble with piercing the veil is by lack of corporate formalities. I mean, it's crazy to think about it, because you'd think that lawyers hate things like, was it LegalZoom, where you make your own company? But I can tell you, as a lawyer who used to litigate, I used to love LegalZoom, because I pierced the veil so many times on LegalZoom companies, because people would pay their $400 to LegalZoom, and they wouldn't register their stock. They wouldn't do any of the stuff they're supposed to do. And then a lawyer can cut through that like a hot knife through butter. So make sure you follow formalities. If you've done your own thing, and I'm sure a lot of people here are totally capable of doing it themselves, make sure that you do enough research to get the I's dotted and the T's crossed, or go hire somebody to do that part for you. But don't go through all this process only to have someone pierce the veil on you. I think as a lawyer, you should have 3 friends as a developer. And Greg actually referred to some of this earlier this morning. You should have a lawyer in your life, somebody that can work with you. And that's kind of hard because a lot of them don't understand what you do, but they're out there. I recommend not going to a big firm. Find somebody small, somebody that's a little, feisty, but also somebody who has knowledge of your industry. But also get yourself a good accountant. And the third one, a lot of people don't think about, what you should increasingly be thinking about in your business, is an insurance broker. And not just any insurance broker, somebody who kind of understands the app development business. Because there are a lot of great insurance products coming online now that can deal with patent stuff and can deal with consumer privacy stuff. And those policies aren't hugely expensive yet, and every one of you should have one. Nothing makes me happier, let me rephrase that. The only thing worse than hearing one of my clients is getting sued is to hear that they're getting sued and they don't have insurance coverage. Because that's what, like bonfire of $100 bills. Okay, Dave, bring it home. So set yourself a company up. Don't be doing this solo. Get yourself some written contracts. Think about the F word when you're doing contracts. Avoid these train wrecks. Definitely get rid of the dynamite underneath your table at any possibility and avoid the bonfire of $100 bills. Get 3 friends and don't get screwed. Thank you, everybody.